you are able to play on different continents through the military, or how did you end up traveling the continents and playing?
So, all of the military bands have slightly different jobs to do. And I was at the Naval Academy for most of my career, and that band's job is really to support the Naval Academy. So we would do run-out concerts to New York and Virginia, but other than that, really didn't travel in the military band. Mm-hmm. So my traveling would be, personally setting up a concert here or there over the years.
Wow. What, out of curiosity, what is the Naval Band doing, like when you say it's in support of the Naval Academy or the Navy, did you say?
Well, both, really,
Okay.
but stationed at the Naval Academy, so we would perform functions there. So we had a concert band. We played concerts in the summer twice a week, and in the winter twice a month. Mm-hmm. And then we had a marching band that would support, parades at the Naval Academy when dignitaries would arrive, or when the students there, the midshipmen, would have their parades. We had ceremonial bands if there were military retirements or promotion ceremonies. I had, smaller groups like a woodwind quintet, brass quintet. There was even a rock band attached to our band they actually did tour the country, but the part of the band I was in, we really didn't tour much.
So it was basically within proximity to the academy, or I guess an installation in the area?
Mostly at the academy, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then while you're doing that, did you travel, or that came after you retired?
While I was in the service, we traveled. We went to China and went to Europe. And
you traveled with them some to play?
No, that was privately. So So when the band would be on leave, on vacation,
gotcha, then
my wife and I would go set up things to do in other countries. And
how did that go for you? Did you learn from somebody else doing that, or you just kind of figured it out on your own?
Just figured it out. Yeah, you have certain times you can take off, and so would do that.
Yeah. And you were performing?
Most of the time. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes we would just go for a vacation, but
I got you. Yeah, I was kind of touching on how it came that you were performing in other countries. Was it based off of the idea that you were playing in the military band, but you're saying that was proximity? You were saying you did that while you were here, and then performing in other continents was all you were doing. It was kind of like on your own type of thing.
Yeah, I would reach out and set up a concert here or there. Yeah,
sure.
So, I mentioned earlier that my wife and I started a business, so that was the impetus for the China visit. They had heard about us through our business and invited us, so we went to a music festival and played there. And then what else did we do? Through the International Clarinet Association, which I'm a member of, I played several times in Europe while I was in the military for their convention. That convention moves around every year to usually I think 2 years in the United States and then 1 year somewhere overseas. And then there was a European clarinet festival that I went and played. Actually, I played in uniform on that one. So I represented the military when I played.
That's cool.
For that one, yeah. And then after I retired, when I was teaching at Southern University in Baton Rouge, the piano professor there, we formed a little classical duo, and we toured Brazil before the pandemic to mainly like a recruiting tool for the university, but we played, I think it was 9 concerts in 7 cities.
Oh, wow.
That was a nice tour. And then just this summer I went on a tour in mostly in Spain, Portugal and Spain.
Mm-hmm. How's your Latin American studies helped you in those fields?
Unfortunately, I didn't learn any Spanish or Portuguese. So the language didn't do anything for me, but I think when you're educated like that, I think that all is kind of in your body, and I think it affects what's happening without maybe you really knowing it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's got to come through somehow.
Yeah.
They walk away with a tinge of familiarity about you.
Right.
You know, that's funny. So now, and you contacted me recently about this. You're planning your own symphony.
Well, so I have a really wonderful friend. We lived in the Washington, D.C. area together, and he's a composer, really a classically trained composer. And I've premiered, I believe, 3 works that he's written specifically for me, as well as numerous works that he's written for a band we used to be in that played new music to old 1920s era silent films. Mm-hmm. And we really just click, both in a friendship as well as musically. We really get each other. And so we both had kind of this simultaneous idea about him composing a concerto or a suite, maybe not a typical concerto, but for jazz, clarinet, and symphony orchestra. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that he'll write multiple movements influenced by jazz, and then after he writes that, we'll try to shop it around to symphony orchestras across the U.S., maybe even internationally, to perform. And I think the idea at this point, we're really in the beginning stages of it, but at this point, the idea is to have the first movement be New Orleans based, where of course jazz was invented, and then the second movement Chicago based, because
I was going to say they might beg to differ on that first comment.
no, jazz was absolutely invented here in New Orleans.
I know,
yeah.
But there's a back and forth between the two. But speak the truth, sir.
Yeah. Well, so when pretty soon after jazz was invented here, the Navy, ironically, shut down Storyville because their sailors were getting in trouble going into the red light district in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the musicians headed up to Chicago. Great example of that being King Oliver, who also enticed probably the greatest jazz musician in history, Louis Armstrong, to join his band. And then shortly after that, a lot of it went to New York. That became the hub of jazz, and then it started to spread across the country, with mostly New Orleans musicians heading to Chicago and then New York. And then they started to educate those people there, and so you start to get people that are playing jazz that aren't from New Orleans, and they start to go to places like Los Angeles and Kansas City, and with even influences in Texas and Oklahoma even.
Sure. That's so fascinating. I wonder if migrations like that cause their origin to be more significant. Like maybe in a time before all of these New Orleans musicians were headed out to Chicago, maybe not too many Chicago musicians played New Orleans. I mean, how was the flow between, was New Orleans on the map, so to speak, as a stopping point for musicians before that happened? Do you know?
Well, certainly. New Orleans was a major city early on in the history of this country, and I can think of a pianist from Latin America named Louis Moreau Gottschalk, mm-hmm. who toured New Orleans many times playing classical music. He wrote classical music, but with that kind of Latin American rhythm in his classical music, like we talked about earlier.
Okay.
And so, so certainly New Orleans was one of the big cities in the United States for musicians to tour to, and I don't know about the interaction between Chicago and New Orleans per se, but certainly New Orleans was definitely on the stop for musicians
sure.
early on.